and get the show on the road. So my name is Rhonda Mace. Some people, especially Kit Kats, or students in the area, know me as Recycle Rhonda. I do all of the school outreach for Chittenden Solid Waste District. And so today we're going to focus on my favorite topic ever, and that is composting with worms. And I have lived in apartments and or roommate situations for many years now. And so composting outside hasn't always been an option for me, and I did some research on ways that I can still compost, but maybe like inside my house, and worms were where it was at. So I started about 7 years ago or so, composting with worms, and yeah, they live right in my house. These particular composting worms are not super hardy in the hot weather or the cold at all. So they do live indoors. It's not for everyone, but I absolutely love it. And the worms that live in my house are very productive. Last year, they made 60 pounds of compost that I then was able to use in my gardens this year. So very passionate about the worm thing. So what we'll do is we'll do a little, again, this is the first time doing like a live webinar with like this webcam. So bear with me. We'll do a little presentation. Basically, it is about an overview of worm composting and how to build your own bin, that kind of thing, a little worm anatomy, so on. And then we'll do some Q&A after that. Again, for those that are joining in, there is a Q&A button at the bottom. Feel free to throw out your questions there. Whatever questions does not get answered today, which there's going to not be a whole lot of us, so I think that'll be fine. But if they don't get answered, I will download a report and get back to you individually. So, but we'll run through that, and then what I'll do is I will demonstrate how to set up your very own homemade worm bin at home, so you'll be ready to rock it and roll it. And while we go through that hands-on demo, or at least hands-on for me, then you can, I'll stop and check on the Q&A. All right, are we ready to rumble? All right, let me just, got that. All right, fantastical. Let's get out of that doodad and share the screen. Pardon me, I do sing a lot too, so. All right, so worms alive, and hopefully everybody is seeing that. Yeah, excellent. So if you're not, throw it up in the Q&A that you're not seeing it, but I'm gonna go with you are. So what is vermicomposting or worm composting? So that is when you're using worms basically to turn your raw food scraps into delicious food for your plants. This could be your garden, this could be your lawn, house plants need food too. So it's a great way to take care of your fruits and veg in your house for sure. Like I said, they're really efficient at what they do. All right, what do you guys know about worms? Now, I always ask my students this, and they all have an array of answers. So I just wanted to give you a few minutes just to kind of think in your head. If you haven't been thinking, like, what do I know about worms? I do not know much, or I think I know a lot. So one of the cool things that about worms are that they are both male and female. So every single worm in the worm bin, in your worm bin, or at least in mine, actually are able to breed or have babies. So the population increase is pretty can be large, which isn't anything to fear, because the more worms the merrier, really. So that's one of my cool things that I like about worms. Let's see here. Let's take a little closer look at their anatomy. So Something cool, I'm not sure you can see my little arrow thing, but worms have 5 hearts, all right, located at the top of their head or at their mouth end anyway. So, a lot of people think that you can cut worms in half and they survive. Well, that is totally untrue. So much like if you cut myself in half, I would not survive. I might wiggle around for a while. And worms are packed full of nerves. So they do wiggle, probably even for 24 hours they might move around, so it makes it seem like both ends are alive or both pieces are alive. But I assure you that those 5 hearts are not going to survive with the back end or a complete circulatory system. So please don't go around cutting worms in half. They will die. Another cool thing about worms is they have these little hairs on the outside of their bodies. They're called setae, and those actually help them sense vibrations and pick up smells, because they have a mouth, but they don't have a nose like us. So they have to pick up the scent of food somehow, and it is through that setae that runs through their central nervous system. So it's pretty cool. And they can feel that vibration coming around. So as soon as they hear a heavy vibration or even a vibration from a loud voice, they will start burrowing down into the ground. And that goes for, I will presume, all earthworms. Fun fact, no earthworms in Vermont. I think there's 19 species, I believe. None of which are native. They all died in the last ice age, 10,000, 11,000 years ago. And all of the earthworms that we have here in Vermont are actually introduced, including this one that we're going to be talking about today. So the composting worm is different than the night crawler that you commonly see, especially after rains in the summertime that come up out deep in the ground. Composting worms are, their species is Icenia fetida, and they are a Mediterranean worm, but they live like right underneath the leaf layer in their natural habitat, and maybe in the first 3 to 6 inches of soil, but they don't burrow down like the night crawlers. So night crawlers are not going to work in your worm composting bin. They want a whole different habitat, and they eat different food items. So composting worms, the Icenia fetida, are what you're going to want to get if you have an interest in starting a worm bin. Again, they live on the top layer, right underneath the leaf layer, or in the first couple of inches of soil. Cool thing about worms, again, that each and every worm can reproduce because they are both female and male. They sidle up, if you've ever seen them. You can see them really well on the night crawlers, but the saddle or the clitellum is where they form what is called a cocoon, the little kind of lemon-shaped thing you see there in the bottom of this diagram. And so they form a cocoon, teeny tiny, but once you get an eye for it, you can spot them, pretty quickly. In that is about 2 or 3 worms. It really just depends, little baby, itty bitty baby worms. And then, after they hatch, they become mature in about 30 days, and then they'll breed every 5 days or so, or they can breed every 5 days or so. Are you going to have worms like flying out of your bin? Probably not. These would be under the incredibly optimal conditions, and we often don't have optimal conditions, or at least even I, who's been doing this for years, can't always make it optimal conditions, especially when you don't have air conditioning in your house and it's like 85 degrees inside the house. So not optimal for them. These particular worms like to live between 60 and 75 degrees is where they're the happiest. It's their happy zone, if you will. Obviously, they live at higher temperatures and lower temperatures. They will die at below 35 degrees and probably over 90 degrees. So those are like their end temperatures. But anyway, this is the life cycle, which I think is very cool. It's cool to go through the bins. If you guys have got Kit Kats at home, And I know like the learning this year is, you know, not what we're used to. So in this neck of the woods anyway, in Williston, it's like 2 days at school and 3 days of remote learning. This is like a fantastic science experiment and a great way to teach kids to care for living creatures. And that just because it's not cute and fuzzy doesn't mean it doesn't deserve our respect. All right, how do we do it? Let's get worm-a-wrangling. Things that you will need to make your own worm castle, if you will. You'll need a house for the worms. You'll need raw fruits and veg. You'll need water, bedding, which is basically just newspaper or paper towels, or a combination of the two, or any kind of paper, which we'll get into. Guidance, which lucky you, Recycle Rhonda is in the house and loves worms. And you can always ask me questions. And you need a little love and a little respect, all right? Not that big of a deal. So you can go big, or you can keep it real, or keep it affordable, or, you know, whatever you, however you want to work with it. So you can use anything at all, and I'll show you a couple of different bin styles that I've picked up. Or you can go online and check out the, you know, check out myriad choices of worm bins on there, prefabricated worm bins. In the bottom corner here is the worm factory. So I think I zoom in. Yeah, that one is not. That's a homemade bin. That's just a 10-gallon storage bin that I got from Lowe's, and turned it into a rock star worm bin. Here's getting a little fancier. We're making double-decker worm farm. And these are 5-gallon containers. And all I did was to make that second one, drilled holes in the bottom. We'll go over this again in person when I'm showing you demoing it, just to kind of build up the actual compost system. Or you can go the prefab style, which is, this is the Worm Factory 360. When I started this job, this was in the shed, so I pulled it out and started using it. I have in the past have had all 5, I've had like 5 containers stacked, like I did the home method, and then somebody donated me one of these worm factories, or gave it to me. So I was like, oh, let me try it out. They are fabulous. There are, you know, some perks to it, but are they necessary to get started? These things are expensive. I think these things go for like 100 something online, or in the store. You don't have to spend $100 to get started worm composting. It's like $7 or $8 for one of those 10-gallon containers at a well, probably at any store, really. So you don't have to go bonkers, but you can if you want to. Who am I to stop you, right? All right, so we've got our house. Now we need, what do they eat? So worms, they will eat just about anything, but because you're composting them in your house, you should be a little more aware of potential odor issues if that's, you know, a concern from you. My worms are strictly vegetarian, so they get no meat. They probably are pretty vegan too, come to think of it. Nope, they get wheat stuff. But anyway, I guess that's not vegan. Anyway, I don't know what I'm talking about, but they get basically fruits and vegetables and some other little treats here and there. But here is like a main course that you would feed, little snacks, although coffee grounds, I'll tell you, I've been feeding all my coffee grounds to the worms, and they seem to be just like loving it. So I would almost put that in the main course as well. The snacks being, you don't want to add too much of that stuff all at one time. And then there are certain foods that are like, boo, let's not feed them. Glossy, shiny paper. They will actually eat the newspaper or the bedding that gets put into the bin. It will break down. They will eat anything that comes from a plant or an animal, but we're going to stick to the plants for these worms. They don't, it's not that they won't eat grass or yard trimmings. They just tend to be wicked high in nitrogen, and they tend to cause some gassing off that is harmful to the worms if you put too much in there. So I always just say, like, stay away from the grassy stuff until you get more experienced at it, and then you can like try it out. No meat and dairy, mainly because that takes longer to break down, and has the potential to be a little more odoriferous, if you get my drift there. Spicy or pickled food, I've actually been doing that in my worm bin just as an experiment. It doesn't seem to be, I eat a lot of pickles, but I've been testing that out. It doesn't seem to affect them, but I'd stay away from it as you're beginning out. No oils, butters, vinegar. Worms breathe through their skin. They, just like frogs and salamanders, and they get the oxygen from the water or the moisture which you provide in your bin. So the oils and the butters definitely will coat their skin and suffocate them, which we don't want to do. Vinegar is really high acidity. It can burn their skin. They get a little testy, and they absorb everything through their skin too. So we just want to protect them from that high or low pH actually. Garlic, onions, leeks, that's mainly, not that they won't eat it, it's mainly to keep the smells down. They take a while to, those husks take a while to break down. Hot peppers, made this list up a while ago. I don't know, I think they would be fine with hot peppers, but you know, again, these are things to test out as you are, abide by this list until you start to get a little more experience under your belt. Citrus is a problem because it's very oily, and the citrus oils, the limonene oil in the citrus, can coat their skin and cause them again to suffocate. So I just avoid, I would avoid citrus. Again, you can experiment later on with small amounts. Pineapple juice, same thing. There's actually something else in pineapple juice that bothers them, and I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but it is highly acidic as well. So just as a starter, just avoid those foods. And don't feel like you have to sit and scribble everything down. Tomorrow there will be a follow-up email that goes out to you guys, and I will link you to the worm composting guide that I developed. And in the back there's a whole bunch of resources, and including where to buy more worms or buy worms if you need them. All right, troubleshooting. So there's always going to be, you know, hiccups along the way, especially when you're starting something brand new. And if you don't know what you're doing, you might make mistakes, but we do our best learning, guys, by making mistakes. And I've made many over the years in doing and working with worms, well, in life in general, but working with worms. Fruit flies, you may run into fruit flies, and when we get off of this whole presentation thing, I'll show you how to troubleshoot and avoid the fruit flies. It all has to do with covering your food up. Same with if you compost in your backyard, if you compost outside, covering your food scraps with a thick layer of leaves will help deter flies and other little visitors, if you will. But fruit flies, to be honest with you, and regular flies are decomposers. Their larvae are decomposers, but you don't particularly want them flying out of your worm bin every time you open it. Too dry, too wet, those are all issues that we will address as we build up the bin. Smells, again, can be mitigated or stopped by adding enough newspaper over the new food that you add in order to keep those smells down. And then worm death, and that can be various reasons, but we'll discuss that too as we get into the actual like building of the worm bin. Reasons worm bins rot. Need I say more? But all of these learning opportunities, and again, with the kids staying home or being home 3 days a week and learning remotely, these are great learning opportunities. And being a teacher myself, like, you know, I'm always looking for that as well, but it also keeps them busy. I have found setting worm bins up with kids, even those kids that are like, ew, worms, ew, usually have their hands in the worm bin by the end of the lesson. So, you know, they may not be into it right away, but they tend to warm up, if you will, to the worms. Nutritional soil amendment. I mean, adding this to your soil boosts the nutritional availability to your plants. The cool thing about the worm compost is that because it goes through the worm's digestive tract, all of the nutrients are readily available. There's no converting to nitrates or nitrites or phosphates in order for the plant to take it up through its roots and out to its bottom parts, if you will, plant parts. They are ready to go. A little different nutrient value than your garden or backyard compost. And I mean, these are just interesting, like I didn't expect this much variation between the two, but there are. And like I said, the phosphorus already comes as a phosphate form, so the plants are ready to take that all up. So some pretty interesting data. And to round out the awesome reasons or why worm bins rock is it's cheap to set up and easy to maintain. Basically, it's free food for your plants. You're reducing greenhouse gases. You're keeping food scraps out of the landfill, which is now illegal in Vermont as of July 1st this year. Easy to expand your operation as your worms breed and make more worms. It's pretty easy to build up, or you can build out, whichever. And my favorite reason actually for composting with worms is you get amazing volunteer plants because they don't eat the seeds. Because they're too big to go through their little bodies. And so each year when I put my compost out, so this year I probably had about 100 tomato plants growing all over the place in my flower bed, in my regular garden. And although that may not seem desirable to you, you can just weed them out. It's not a big deal. But I think it's awesome. And when I lived in a house with a little kid, we used to have a giving garden. And we would put worm compost in this little plot, little raised bed, and everything that grew in there from the worm compost, we planted nothing. It all came from the worm compost. We would donate to the food shelf. So that was our giving garden. And literally the worms were giving it back. So now I have probably about 40 tomato plants, 2 of which I actually grew indoors and planted outside. That is it. There's 38 of them are all from just throwing worm compost out there and letting it do its magic. I did get some cucumbers as well and some odd squashes, but that's, you know, I don't know, as a bio person or biology person, I enjoy those surprises. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing this screen and go back to this screen. And any questions from there? Any burning? No. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to test out my webcam skills here, and I'm going to back it up here to do a bit of demonstrating. All right, take these glasses off. So, like I said, you can use things that have been laying around. Here is a drawer from a cabinet, from one of those like plastic cabinets. This would work great. Like I said, the worms don't like to dig deep. So deep stuff, like a deep bin, isn't necessary. I have designed them with sweater boxes, those ones that are like this much, this tall or so, and fit under the bed. So if you, more surface area is better than depth. So this would work out great. It doesn't have a lid, but that's okay because you can always just put wet newspaper over the top and then put some bubble wrap to keep that moisture in very lightly on the top because you still need air circulation in there. But so that would work. I have used these time and time again. These are again just 10-gallon rugged totes that you can get at just about any store. Or this is another thing that I've moved to, these storage boxes. This is an HDX box, but this will work just as fine too. This one's 7 gallons. And so basically, let me put that down here for a second and show you. This is a completed worm bin here. Just get that out of the way so we can get it. So that is what a homemade worm bin looks like. So right now it looks like a whole bunch of newspapers, but underneath that newspaper are all of the worms hanging out, eating up the food and whatnot. They went on a trip last night because I did teach some pre-K teachers about worm composting. And so they traveled, and they're probably a little upset with me because they don't like a lot of change. I'll tell you that much. So choose your bin, whatever bin you want. First things first, you need to put air holes in it. I have stopped, when I first started doing it, I was putting air holes in the lid. I feel like that probably dries the bin out too much. So I've stopped putting air holes in the lid, and I just drill air holes around the outside. So you can see, there you go. All right. So I'm just going to demonstrate. So I use different sizes, 1/2 inch, which are really big holes. You can do a couple of those. You can do 1/8 inch and do a whole lot of holes around the outside. You can do 1/4 inch and do a couple. I've gotten into using this spade drill bit, which is pretty awesome. And so I don't know how this is going to work with my rolling cart here. But so you just want to drill a few holes, and depending again on the size, you just want air circulation in there. Although the worms are not breathing the air, there's other microbes that are in there that are helping break down the food into small pieces so that those worms can eat them. And I'll show you how big the worms are in just a second, but they don't get much longer than 3 inches. They're small, very small in comparison to the night crawlers. All right, so let me. All right, so you just want to go around doing that. That's it. Like I said, I've been getting into that spade drill bit. It can get a little touchy. I wouldn't give too much pressure because it can crack it. But even if it cracks, it's no big deal. So what you got there is one big giant air hole. So I'd probably do like 3 or 4 of these along this side, probably like 2 on this side, 3 or 4 along, and 2. And that should be plenty of air circulation. But the thing is, if you realize there's not enough air getting in there, you can always drill more holes. Wow. Or you can just use a regular old drill bit too. All right. So your choice. Now, one of the things that I do after I drill my holes is I like to get out a little sandpaper and just sand down. Because my motto, one of them is dirty hands are happy hands. I like to dig into my worm bins and just kind of check on them and see how they're doing. And I have more than once like cut myself because this plastic is like snaggy on the inside. And so I just like to, I like to sand it down. Now you're probably asking yourself, well, aren't the worms gonna escape through those holes? They can. However, if you make spa-like conditions, if you create the perfect habitat and you make them happy and you keep them at say 80% moisture, right? That's what they like. They like to, like, again, they need it to move, but they also need it to breathe, the moisture. They can't swim necessarily. They can't live in standing water, so you don't want that, but you want it a little wetter than, say, a wet sponge. So 80%-ish moisture, you provide them food, and you keep them between 60 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit, or as close to those temperatures as you can get. They're going to stay in there. I have never once personally had worms escape on me. Now, with that said, I have worked with schools. Get a call at 6 o'clock in the morning from a teacher one time, like, oh my gosh, Rhonda came into the classroom. Boom, the worms are everywhere. They're like all over the floor, like, and not alive. And I'm like, yeah, I was like, well, so she swept them up before the kids came in, thankfully. She told them they went on vacation, 2nd graders. And then I came in to check it out. Like, I just looked at the bin and it was so dry in there. I don't know that they had not checked on it for a while or given it water or watered them. But their bin dried out really quickly, or dried out. And the worms were just trying to find moisture because they couldn't breathe. And so they were like, oh, let me get some moisture. So they will, if you see them coming out of the holes, that means there's something really wrong going on in the bin. And just check out what's going on. But like I said, in 7 years, I've never, and I've made plenty of mistakes. So they're pretty resilient. I've never had them escape. And as a matter of fact, last night I came into, this is where I'm at Green Mountain Compost in my office. And I came in and I realized that when we moved out of the office at the beginning of the pandemic and we were made to work at home, forgot to grab my demo bin. I forgot to grab this demonstration bin. Sat in my office since March 22nd until yesterday with no food, no water, nothing like that. And they were fun. They were a little dehydrated, but they didn't even try to escape. So there was no worms on the floor or anything like that. And it was, everything was fine and dandy. And I just gave them a lot of water and some food. And like I said, they had to travel, so they're not happy about that either, but they'll get over it. They're forgiving little creatures. All right, so air holes. Again, they will escape if, in fact, things are not optimal in the bin. And this is all in the guide that you guys will have a link to. I will also send you links to other online sources. Facebook, if you're a Facebooker, Facebook has some great worm composting groups that I learn tons in. And I don't get on Facebook often, but when I do, I get like stuck on the worms. And wow, I just learned an incredible amount of information. So there's two particular groups on there that I really like and have helped me out in situations too. So there's a lot of resources out there. All right, so we get our bin. All right, we drilled our holes, all's good. Now we need to figure out what goes in here. First, they need bedding. I call it bedding. They're gonna eat it too, but they need a nice fluffy bed. Again, they are not soil dwellers. They don't dig down into the soil, so you do not have to add any dirt to this at all. No soil needed. I use shredded newspaper or shredded any kind of paper. I have my bin that I have labeled shredded paper, worm food, worm bedding. I stack up on Saturday mornings is feeding time at the zoo, if you will, at my house. I feed the worms on Saturday mornings, and I shred paper. So I just stack all of those newspapers that come in my mailbox, the 7 days that I get every week, I stack it all up, and then I just do a Saturday morning shred. Now, there are some paper that you cannot use. Let me grab a stack of papers here. The shiny ads and the coupons, I would definitely not use the glossy stuff that you get in the mail. So all of your little glossy things, that's a no-no. I don't know what they're coated with or what makes them glossy, so I don't feed them to the worms. I just put these in the recycle bin. All right, paper towels, so long as not any chemicals have not been used on them, but if you use paper towels to wipe up spills or to dry dry your paws, these things, fantastic. Save those, feed those to the worms, you make them bedding. Packing paper, so especially in today's time, a lot of people are getting things in the mail, comes with this packing paper, perfect for the worm bin. I drink a lot of Vermont coffee, and it comes like in a paper bag, like the beans come in a paper bag. I just shred that up too, put that right in there. And of course, any sort of newspaper. Paper bags, those work as well too. So all of that can go into the worm bin. Now, you don't want to put it in just like this. They like a fluffy bed, like many people. So usually, I like to let the paper soak for like at least 10 minutes so that it absorbs the water. The idea with the bedding is, one, it gives them a place to move around that's nice and fluffy and not compact, because they are not strong. They're small. They're not strong like your night crawlers, so they can't wiggle through the dirt. That's why dirt isn't even necessary in your worm bin. But they like to easily move through nice fluffy newspaper. But it needs to be wet. The longer it soaks, the more water it absorbs, and the longer that moisture will stay in your bin. I'll be honest, Friday nights, I will stick my paper in the bin and let it soak overnight. You don't have to get that fanatical, but it's okay. You might, because you might be like, ooh, worms. I'm loving this whole thing. I wasn't necessarily like a crazy worm person until, last couple of years. But anyway, so you can I just use a bucket. I fill it halfway up with water, and then I just take my shredded paper from my bin, right like that, stuff it in there, and just let it soak. Now the stuff that's been in there has been soaking since, whoops, early this morning. Another thing that the kids love to do, they love to shred the paper, they love soaking it and squeezing it out. And making each other wet. Now, shredding the paper, yeah, you just want to, I mean, it's not, that one's okay. It's not the typical, just, this is what I do. And this is what I do on Saturday mornings, over coffee, just tear it up and shred it. And if you do it like weekly or even daily, or have the kids do it, because, I mean, they love this job, trust me. And then I just store it, and then I'm ready to go to have shredded paper. And I don't have to worry about it when I'm ready to feed them. You aren't going to need it every single time, but. So then, you don't want to put in your worm bin, you don't want to put your shredded paper in all drippy, drippy wet, all right? They do need moisture to survive, but they will drown in standing water. So, you just want to give it a little ring, all right? Probably just a little wetter than a wet sponge. All right, and then you're gonna give it a little fluffle duffle, do ya? So just fluff it up a little bit. And this is like the, you know, when you're starting a new bin. You're not gonna have to do this every time, make a bottom layer anyway. So this is just to get you started. So you're gonna fill the bottom of your bin with about 2 inches of moist shredded paper, all right? Boom. So drill holes, soak your paper while you're drilling holes, squeeze your paper out, spread it out 2 inches thick on the bottom. Once you get that done, then you are ready to add your worms. Now, let's get these. Where'd you go? Oh, there you are. Where'd you go? All right, so let me see if I can get these up close for you to look at on the webcam. And like I said, these are different than your night crawlers. One, they really enjoy the company of each other. So they are communal worms, and you can hopefully see those. And they're not very big. So this is, let me grab up, you look like an adult. You are an adult. Oh, sorry, buddy. Holy bananas. So let me put these guys back. So this is an adult right here. And not very big, you know, about 3 inches long, but very skinny. And that guy is gonna be eating half his body weight or half its body weight in food every single day. Like I said, worms eat a lot and they produce compost very quickly, much quicker than your backyard, even a lot quicker than we do here at our like industrial facility at Green Mountain Compost. So they are teeny tiny, but you're gonna add your worms and you can just pop them right in one big clump because again, they like to live communally. They definitely strive together or hang out together. So wherever the food is where these worms are going to be. Oh, there we go. Rinse my hands off. All right, so once you have them in your bin, then you're gonna worry about food. Now, there was that menu, and I don't want you to be like weirded out by that menu and be like, oh my God, this is too much to remember. So basically, no oranges, no citrus. That's it. That's really basically the rules. Now, I store my worm food in a big container like this, clearly marked in my fridge. All right. This is just a big sour cream container that I got from a restaurant. It sits in the door of my refrigerator. I have a couple of these actually, but and that's where it stays all week. So as I'm cooking, chopping up my peppercorns and chopping up my ends of my carrots or the carrot peels. What's in here? This looks like some chard leaves, coffee grounds, you know, things like that. Just as I'm doing apple cores because you eat a lot of apples. So the apple cores get just, and I just chop it up as I go because The worms aren't going to eat big chunks of stuff. The smaller the pieces, the quicker it's going to compost. And that's whether it's outside or in your worm bin is the same case, but you can think of how small those worms are, and you got to chop it up in little pieces so that they can eat it easier. And the idea is that the microbes that are in there are going to come down and break it into smaller pieces, and they can do their job better to break it into smaller pieces for the worms to eat if there's greater surface area and they're in smaller bits. So go ahead and do that. And like I said, I just chop it up right away. And then all you have to do at the end of the week is, where'd you go? Oh, there you are. You just dump the food in right like that. All right, so that's what it looks like. Right like that. Just dump it right over the top of them. Again, they are going to move to wherever the food is. And now all you have to do is cover that food up. Now, we were talking earlier in the presentation about, look at that, about troubleshooting. So this is, I think, where people make a big mistake, or where they can make the biggest mistake. Again, you want to wring that out a little wetter than a wet sponge, all right? You want to cover this food, this new food that you added, and your worms with about 2 or 3 inches of the wet newspaper or paper towels or whatever you're using, the shredded paper bin. 2 to 3 inches. You want to make sure that's nice and thick. Fluff it up. You don't want to mush it down. But the carbon that is in the paper will suppress the smells, all right? Because carbon as an atom likes to make a lot of friends, and it likes to make friends with stinky friends. And so it will help keep the smells down in your worm bin. But it's not even just the odor that you would be smelling, it's the odors that flies would be smelling or anything else. I personally have never had a fruit fly issue in my worm bin, and I truly believe it's because I've always been very vigilant on covering the food scraps with the newspaper or with paper in order to keep that odor down. It also, just like your backyard compost, you need a 3-to-1 ratio of brown food, like your paper, to green food, your food scraps. Because just because it's the worms composting doesn't mean there's still some sort of method to madness, if you will. So I just cover it all with 2 to 3 inches of newspaper, nice and moist. And then you're ready. So if you get a bin like this, that's it. Then you just pop the lid on, put it in a dark closet that will not get over hot or get really hot or get really cold. And there you go. You're done for the week. Sometimes it takes them a long time a couple of weeks to acclimate, kind of like if you go on vacation, it takes you a while to get into the groove of a new place. Same with the worms. So if you do order, say, a pound of worms, it's going to take them a week or 2 to get used to their new surroundings. So don't be concerned if you go back in and you're like, did they eat? And then all you have to do is, in a week or, a few days, if you want to check every couple of days, is all you have to do is, I have to figure this webcam thing out. Take your newspaper, peel it back, and see if there's food that's still in the bin. If there's still food in the bin, you can just put your paper back over the top, tuck them back in, and let them do their magic. And they will eventually eat all of that down. When the food is gone, you're ready to feed again. And you don't have to keep replacing this paper. You can just peel it back, put some new food down, put the paper over. Now, if the paper is starting to, decompose and starting to break down, the worms are eating it, and you're now at an inch, you can just add another inch of fresh soaked paper, and you're ready to go. So that's your basic, really, right there. Now you're like, all right, so how do I get the compost out of the bin? Because, ultimately, not only is it cool to see the worms doing their wormy stuff, but it makes a lot of compost, 60 pounds of compost from just myself. I live alone, so it is just me. And I didn't feed them all that much food. I think 80 pounds or maybe 90 pounds of food that I also borrowed from other people. Now I'm having to feed my work ones at home too, and little bit of worm rivalry going on in my house. But so when you're ready to harvest, all you need to do is feed one side of your bin. So you just put the food all on one side. And like I said, the worms are going to move to where the food is. After about 3 weeks or so, most of the worms should have migrated to one side, and you can take all of the compost out of here. You're probably going to get some worms up in there. I probably will. I always do when I harvest too, as well as those cocoons, which is where the baby worms come from. But I mean, they're probably going to survive winters out here in Vermont, outside in Vermont, but you know, they're gonna have an okay life up until the freezing cold weather hits. And we just can't avoid it unless you want to sit. Maybe you could use that as like a punishment. Like, all right, you're grounded and you have to pick all the worms out of the worm compost. I don't know. Probably why I'm not a parent. But so you that's one way of doing it. All right, and then once they all moved over there and you harvested the right side, you can feed the right side and they'll move back over to that side, and then you can get the compost out of the remaining side of your bin. But if you're like, ugh, that just seems like I don't want to be doing that, you can go double decker. Or as I was at one point, I had 5 decks. So if you have a system like, or a bin, so you want to get like bins if you plan on expanding your operation, doing a high rise for the worms. Let me get this all out of the way. So if you have a bin like this one here, all right, so I've got this all fed, they just got fed, and so I'm like, all right, well, now I got a lot of worms going on. I got a lot of compost to harvest, so I'm just going to add another layer. All right, so what I did here is drilled holes in the bottom. All right, that allows the worms to move up through those holes, and so you would have set this up just like it's a new bin. So you put your soaked paper, shredded paper on the bottom, put your food in there, put your soaked shredded paper on the top, 2 to 3 inches thick, and sit it in there. And like I said, the worms are gonna know where that food is because those little hairs, the setae along their body, are gonna pick up where those chemicals are coming off of the food. They're gonna move up there, and then voila, you have a almost worm-free. There'll always be ones that hang out. You have almost a worm-free bin of compost. So you can just dump that out, and then guess what? You start all over. Start that off with your shredded, moist shredded paper, food, moist shredded paper, put this back on, put your lid on the top, and then they'll move down to where the food is. And then you can just kind of go back and forth that way. Now, at home, my old system, I had 5 of these stacked up. And so that's how I was rolling in the old days until somebody donated that Worm Farm 360 or Factory or whatever it's called, which does work great. I like it a lot, and it fits a little better in my closet. However, it's not necessary to spend $100 and some unless you got somebody who wants to donate one to you. So that is the way that you can harvest, the way that you can expand your operations. All right, so I'm gonna come, I think that's about it. Let me just do that so I can fit better into the camera here. So let me see. Oh, only one question. Can you use your regular paper printer paper or old letter? Yeah, you should be able to do that. Most in ink these days, even the ink that you buy for your own printer is soy-based, so it should not be a problem. So yeah, if you want to shred that up, I always tell people that if they have the sensitive documents that they've shredded in their home office, the worms, your secret is safe with them. They're not going to divulge your secret. So you can feed that to them and actually, you know, put it back out into your garden the following year. Ooh, need my glasses on now. All right. Is it the bottom layers where you have the compost material? Yeah, so as they chew up the food, it like fills up with compost. So basically it's, I mean, the compost is, you know, worm poop. That's basically what's happening in there. And so it'll layer up. Last year, I started off a second grade class with a fresh worm bin, and in September, and I want to say it was like January that I went back to visit, because the teacher was like, oh, I don't know what to do because like the worms are almost falling out of the bin. So they had a bin like this. So this size bin, a 10-gallon bin. And when I went there, it was almost up to the air holes. Those worms made so much compost in a very short amount of time, but it was a class of like 22 second graders. And they were very good at taking care of them. I mean, really good. I've never seen that before. A school succeeds so well and makes so much compost in a short amount of time. So I was very proud of them. So you can get a lot. So yeah, that compost, the usable compost, is going to be in the bottom. How long do the worms live? They just become compost too. You bet. So they live. And it's hard. I mean, research that I have, I've read. I don't know for sure because it's hard to track. I have probably about 6,000 worms in my home bin, probably about 4,000-ish in the work bin. And each 1,000 worms are about a pound. So it's a little hard to tell how long they live, but in the research that I've read, it's like 2 to 3 years is an adult life. And think about once they hit maturity, breeding maturity, that is, they can breed every 5 days. So you can have a big turnaround if they're super wicked happy up in there. And I started off with literally a handful of worms. And like I said, I have 6,000 now, and I usually cut that in half. Like last night I did a worm composting thing with some teachers, and I probably took about 25% of my home worms out. So I call the herd, if you will, every year because there's just so many, and it's just me. I don't have a lot of food waste aside from like vegetable and fruit stuff that you wouldn't eat. Compost too. All right, let me just keep track of what I have answered and did that one. And then, Laura McVeigh. Do you just dump the compost into your regular flower gardens? You bet. Do note though, whatever seeds that you put in there. So I'm not sure you caught this at the beginning, but so they are not going to eat seeds. So if you're doing like cucumber seeds or squash seeds, zucchini seeds, tomato seeds, those will not break down necessarily over time during the compost process because they're not going to eat them. They're too big for them to ingest. But so you will get that in your worm compost when you put it out into your flower gardens. But on that note, unless you hate tomatoes and cucumbers, it's kind of awesome. That's one of the perks, I think, is that I can grow food free of charge. I don't have to buy it at all, and it grows amongst my flowers as well. So I've got random tomato plants and squash plants growing within my flower bed. But yeah, you can put it directly in. Now, with that said, it's a little stronger than your garden compost. So if you're making like a soil, I would use probably, I'd back off to probably about 25% by volume worm compost. But I've used it in my house plants all the time, and I just sprinkle it on the top. Or if I'm transplanting, I put it on the bottom. But yeah, you can pop that in the garden. And it feels a lot different than, say, garden compost or backyard compost. It feels different too. But I've incorporated into the soil more so than top dressing. It doesn't work as well as a top dressing than your backyard compost or compost that you would buy from a facility. So I definitely try to work it into the soil around the roots of your plants. But my flowers seem to be very happy. How do you dispatch the worms you need to remove? So when you're ready to harvest, is that what you're asking, Taya? Like when you're ready to harvest your compost? Because most of them will move out. You can, call a herd. I see. Oh, how do I do that? So they love both my home and my work compost worms love watermelon, cantaloupe, any kind of melon, and any kind of squash. So I usually, if I'm teaching a class, and that's when I'm calling the herd, I bring them up with watermelon or cantaloupe. I slice it up and I lay it on the top, and they will all come to there. And then all I have to do is lift the pieces up and scoop up the worms. So I don't like ditch them or anything. I usually call the herd and give them to people who want to compost with worms. So typically schools. And I usually do that at the beginning of the school year because sometimes I'm going to, 10, 15 classes, setting them up with worm composting. So, that's why I have my work worms as well as my home worms, but it's a way for me to cut my population back a little bit and still maintain worm composting operation in my own house. So I didn't mean that I called them and then got rid of them. I give them to people that want to compost. So, and there's a lot of people, there's a lot of secret worm wranglers out there. So you might, if instead of buying worms off of the internet, you might want to throw out a front porch worm post or a posting Craigslist and say like, hey, does anybody have any composting worms available? I'm looking to start my own bin. So that's a choice as well. Any other questions? All right, well, that's really the basics of worm composting. There are a lot of great books out there. Mary Applehoff has written some pretty incredible stuff. Great little science projects too for a follow-up book, but I think it's Worms Ate My Garbage is her book. Fantastic for beginners. I would highly recommend getting that book. Once you get a little deeper into it, like I'm into this chick in NC State. Her name's Rhonda as well. But she's worm composting guru. So I moved into looking at larger operations of that as a potential, moonlight job. But that's so far has been an incredibly resourceful book too. So in the worm guide that I'm going to send you a link to, there are a list of those resources as well. And like I said, the Facebook worm composting network is groups are really, really good and really helpful and never judgy for asking questions as beginners or as experienced worm composters. That's one of the things. It's not like, oh, dude, you didn't know that. They're very kind. So thank you guys so much for coming out. This is the first worm webinar I have done. So I will also send with that email, it'll be a feedback form or an evaluation form. So please be honest on how this can improve. Again, I was using a new, this webcam that I don't know how it really worked, but hopefully it worked well, and how we can improve this situation. I'm very active and I just like to get my hands dirty and show you guys how these things are done. So thanks, man. It is Thursday. Tomorrow is Friday. And it looks like a beautiful weekend, low humidity and good temps. So get out and have some fun. Be safe. And if you ever have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. And I am happy to help out. All right. Take it easy, guys. Have a great afternoon. I know I'm going to get outside.
Yo, GMC. Let me tell you about me. My name is Rhonda. This is what you want to see. Put the compost in the bin. Remember to recycle that tin.
The coffee's in the lobby. Composting is my hobby.
We got big machines making that.